"I will not be your bride," I said to the Duke. The contract was on the wrong side of the botanical sketches, which was the first problem, and the Duke of Ashbourne was on the wrong side of the argument, which was the second, and Rosalind Voss had approximately no patience left for either. "Move it," she said, not looking up from the peony study she was finishing, her pen still moving. "You've put it directly on top of the root system diagram and the ink isn't dry. Miss Voss." The Duke's voice had the quality of a man exercising considerable restraint. "The contract. I see the contract." She shifted it herself, with 2 careful fingers at the corner, and set it aside. "I'm choosing not to engage with it until I've finished this line, because if I lift my pen now the stem will be wrong and I've redrawn it 4 times already." A silence followed that had weight and temperature. Rosalind finished the line, set down her pen, and looked up. The Duke of Ashbourne stood on the other side of the library table with his arms at his sides and his jaw set and the expression of a man who had expected this to be simple. He was tall, dark-coated, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that would have been handsome if it had been arranged into anything other than its current configuration of controlled displeasure. He was 34. He was, as all of London knew, notoriously difficult, privately brilliant, publicly unapproachable, and entirely unmarried, which the same London attributed variously to pride, coldness, and what one particularly creative dowager had described as an inability to tolerate other people existing in his vicinity. Rosalind had formed her own opinion in approximately 8 minutes. "Your Grace," she said, folding her hands on top of the peony study with the deliberate patience of someone who has decided to be extremely clear. "I will not be your bride." He blinked. It was the first involuntary thing she had seen him do. "You haven't read the terms." "I don't need to read the terms. The terms are irrelevant to my objection." "Your objection," he repeated. "My objection," she confirmed, "is not financial. My objection is not social. My objection is that you are the man who, 20 minutes ago, picked up my specimen of Peonia lactiflora and referred to it as a poppy." She gestured at the jar on the left side of the table. "That is a poppy. This," she touched the pressed specimen, "is a peony. They are as different as a carriage horse and a hunting dog, and a man who cannot tell them apart has no business presenting me with a marriage contract in my father's library." The Duke looked at the poppy. He looked at the peony. Something moved across his face that might, in a better light, have been embarrassment. "I am not a botanist," he said. "No," Rosalind agreed. "You are not. Which is precisely why you need one." She pulled the contract across the table and read it properly, with the focused speed of a woman who had been reading her father's legal documents since she was 12. She reached the 3rd clause. "This is about the patent." "Yes. The Royal Botanical Patent my father spent 16 years acquiring, which covers drainage methodology for waterlogged land, which he left to me." She set the contract down. "You need it because your ancestral estate is, what was the word your solicitor used in the letter?" "Saturated," the Duke said, with the expression of a man swallowing something unpleasant. "Saturated." Rosalind nodded. "Which is a polite way of saying that Ashbourne Park is actively becoming a marsh, and will be uninhabitable within 3 years unless someone with a genuine understanding of subsurface drainage and soil alkalinity does something about it." She looked at him. "Your solicitor came to me first, incidentally. Before you did. He asked whether I would simply sell the patent. I declined. I know. That is why I'm here. And your solution was to marry me. It seemed efficient." "Efficient." She looked at him for a moment with the particular expression she reserved for people who had surprised her in a direction she hadn't anticipated. "You proposed marriage to a woman you've never met because you needed her intellectual property and decided acquisition was simpler than collaboration. When you phrase it like that. How would you prefer I phrase it?" He was quiet. She gave him a moment and then stood, because sitting put her at a disadvantage in terms of the room's spatial dynamics, and she had learned early that spatial dynamics mattered when you were 19 and the person across from you was both a duke and a full head taller. "Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden beauty and unexpected love, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories where pain shatters and true character shines through. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and your presence makes these stories come alive. She was not tall. She was not, by society's current enthusiasms, conventionally presented. Her dark hair was pinned up with more efficiency than elegance. There was a small ink stain on her left index finger that she had stopped noticing, and her dress was sensible rather than decorative because she worked in it. But she had her father's eyes, which were very dark and very direct, and she had his mind, which was the sharpest thing in the room, including the pen she'd just set down. "Here is what I know," she said. "Your estate has a drainage problem that originates in the northwest quadrant, most likely from a blocked subsurface channel that was redirected during the construction of the east wing sometime in the last 30 years. The water is collecting in the clay substrate and has nowhere to go. Left untreated, it will undermine the foundations of the oldest part of the house within 18 months. She picked up the contract. "Here is what else I know. You don't need my signature on a marriage contract. You need my expertise in the field, access to my father's drainage methodology, and someone who can implement it without destroying the existing topography." She held the contract out to him. "Take this back. And when you've thought about it properly, come back with something worth discussing." The Duke stood on his side of the table. The candles were low, they'd been burning since before he arrived, and the light was doing no favors to either of their expressions. He took the contract. He looked at it, and then at her, and then at the peony specimen, which was objectively more interesting than the poppy. "You know exactly what the problem is," he said slowly. "I've known since your solicitor described the estate. My father spent 2 years working on a similar situation in Dorset." She began rearranging her sketches back into their proper order. "The methodology works. I've tested the theoretical models." "You tested the theoretical models?" He said it the way people said things they were still processing. "How old are you?" "Old enough to know what a peony is," Rosalind said, without looking up. "Come back tomorrow, Your Grace. With a proposal that involves my mind rather than my name." He left. She listened to his footsteps go down the hall, and the front door open and close, and then she sat back down at her table and picked up her pen, and her hand was entirely steady, which she was moderately proud of. Then she allowed herself, in the privacy of the empty library, to find the expression that had crossed his face when she explained the northwest quadrant problem extremely interesting. He had not looked annoyed. He had looked, for approximately 4 seconds, like a man encountering something he had not planned for. She picked up the poppy specimen and looked at it for a moment. "Not a peony," she told it, and went back to work. Chapter 2. He came back the next day with a different document. It was shorter, considerably more practical, and titled, she appreciated this, professional arrangement, terms of scholarly engagement, which was either a genuine concession or a very good performance of one. She read it twice, made 3 annotations in the margin with her pen, slid it back across the table, and waited while he read her corrections. He read them. He did not argue with any of them. He signed. She signed. That was how Rosalind Voss came to Ashbourne Park as a visiting scholar, with a trunk of books, a case of instruments, and a cover story that had been constructed with some care because the Dowager Duchess of Ashbourne was already in residence and had the particular territorial quality of a woman who considers all decisions made in her son's house to be, in some essential way, her own. "My mother," the Duke said, on the drive to the estate, "believes you are a distant connection of the Earl of Marlow, recommended by the Royal Society for a study of Somerset soil conditions." "I am not any of those things," Rosalind said. "No." He looked out the window. "She must not know that. What happens if she finds out I'm a parson's daughter from Wiltshire with ink on her hands? She will make your life significantly unpleasant and the arrangement will become difficult to maintain." He turned back from the window. "Can you perform the role of a society-adjacent scholar for the duration?" Rosalind thought about the 3 seasons she had spent at her aunt's house in Bath watching women perform elaborate versions of themselves for audiences that were largely unimpressed, and said, "I can perform most things when the work requires it." He nodded. He looked back out the window. She looked at his profile, the sharp jaw, the composed exterior, the hands that were folded on his knee with a stillness that she was beginning to think was not coldness but control, which was a different thing. "You'll need to not call things poppies," she said. "I am aware of that now," he said, and she detected, very faintly, the dry inflection she was coming to identify as his closest approach to self-deprecation. Ashbourne Park was everything his solicitor's letter had described and more. The house was beautiful old stone, the genuine kind that had absorbed centuries rather than merely suggested them, but the northwest gardens were waterlogged to a degree that had begun to look less like neglect and more like nature reclaiming a decision. The lawn squelched. The rose beds were drowning from below. 2 of the oldest elms had root rot that had come from sustained saturation. Rosalind walked the northwest quadrant on her first afternoon with her notebooks and her measuring instruments and the particular focused energy she could never fully contain when a problem was in front of her. The Duke walked beside her, 2 paces back, watching her work with the expression he'd been wearing since the library, that careful, assessing attention, as if he was revising something. "The channel is here," she said, on her knees in the long grass near the base of the East Wing's foundation, pressing her hand into the earth. "Feel." She looked up. He was standing over her, somewhat uncertain about the kneeling. "Your Grace," she said, "the ground will support your weight. Feel the saturation level." He crouched beside her, somewhat stiffly, she noted. The coat was not designed for field work, and pressed his hand into the earth as she had. She watched his face as he registered the water table just below the surface. "That's a blocked channel, yes. There was a redirect here, probably when the East Wing foundations were dug. The original drainage path was never restored." She was already sketching in her notebook. "We need to trace it back 40 feet and cut a new lateral trench to redirect the flow." "How long?" "If the weather holds, 3 weeks. If it doesn't," she looked at the sky, which had the grey particular intention of English November, 4. The weather did not hold. It rained the following Tuesday with the committed thoroughness of weather that has made a decision, and Rosalind was already in the northwest garden by 7 in the morning because the rain actually helped, pressing the soil down and making the saturation pattern visible, and she needed to mark the channel path before the estate's drainage team started digging. She was marking the eastern edge of the trench line when the ground shifted. It was a pocket, a subsurface void where the water had been collecting below a thin layer of topsoil, invisible until weight was applied to it, and she went through it to the knee in one sudden, ungraceful movement, the kind that happened too fast for reaction and left her standing at a 45-degree angle with one leg in and one leg considerably wetter than it had been. "Miss Voss." The voice came from behind her, and she turned enough to see the Duke crossing the lawn with a focused expression, his coat unsuitably clean for the weather. "I'm fine," she said. "You're at an angle." "I'm assessing the pocket depth," she said, which was partly true. He reached her. He looked at the situation with the practical evaluation of a man who had decided not to comment on the angle, which she appreciated. He crouched at the edge of the pocket, got one arm under hers, and pulled. It required more effort than either of them had probably expected. She came out of the mud with a sound that she decided, firmly, was not something she was going to think about again. She found herself standing on solid ground, the Duke's arm still under hers, closer than they had been in the library, considerably muddier than she had been at the start of the sentence. He was very close. She could smell the rain and, underneath it, the cedar and something expensive that was apparently just him, and his coat had mud on the sleeve now, and he was looking at her with the controlled expression that she was becoming able to read well enough to know it was not what was actually happening behind it. "The pocket extends approximately 2 feet, she said. "Which is useful data." He said. "You can let go now." "Yes." He didn't immediately. Then he did, and stepped back, and looked at his mud-coated sleeve with the equanimity of a man making peace with a situation. "Your coat," she said. "It was the wrong coat for the garden," he said. "Why did you wear it?" A pause. "I was going to check on the progress," he said, and she did not pursue this because his tone had the particular quality of a man who has answered a question and would prefer not to examine the answer further. He walked back to the house. She watched him go, rain running down her face, notebook in hand, with the entirely inconvenient awareness that she had been held up by him and had not, for the full duration of it, thought about the drainage channel once. She wrote it in her notebook anyway. Pocket, eastern edge, 2-foot depth, saturated clay substrate. Then, below it, smaller, cedar and rain. Irrelevant. She underlined irrelevant twice and went back to marking the trench line. Chapter 3. The night blooming Sirius opened at 1:30 in the morning, which Rosalind knew because she had been watching it since midnight. It was the conservatory's finest specimen, Selanisarius grandiflorus, 3 years in cultivation, her father's pride originally and now, by the strange logic of how she had come to be at Ashbourne Park, her responsibility. It bloomed for one night only, between midnight and dawn, and she had been tracking the bud's development for 2 weeks. She had her notebook. She had 3 candles. She had a small chemical experiment running on the secondary bench that she was monitoring simultaneously, a soil alkalinity test using the compound her father had developed, which had a known and manageable volatility if the proportions were observed. The proportions required attention. She was recording the serious measurements when she heard the door. The Duke appeared in the conservatory entrance with his cravat loose and his coat absent and his hair out of its queue, which was the most undone she had ever seen him, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had come somewhere specific and is now reassessing whether he had expected to find another person there. "Miss Voss. Your Grace." She did not put down her pen. "The Sirius is opening." He came in, because she had not told him not to and because, she suspected, the night-blooming Sirius was the kind of thing you came closer to once you had seen it. He stood beside her bench and looked at the flower, which was extraordinary, wide and white and faintly luminous, with the particular quality of something that only existed because of the dark. "I couldn't sleep," he said, which she had not asked. "Neither could I," she said, which she had not meant to say. They stood for a moment in the candlelight with the Sirius opening between them, and she pointed out the stamen formation and the nocturnal pollination mechanism, and he listened with the focused quiet she had come to recognize as genuine interest rather than performance, asking questions that confirmed he had actually understood the previous answers. "The alkalinity test," she said, returning to the secondary bench, "needs a second compound added now. The timing matters." She measured carefully, added the first element, and then looked at her notebook for the second. "Hand me the bottle on the left, please. The green glass." He handed her a bottle. She added it. The result was immediate, moderately alarming, and entirely purple. It was not dangerous, she knew this because she had made this particular error once before, at 16, in her father's study, but it was comprehensive. The small vessel produced a soft compression of air and a very enthusiastic cloud of violet-colored vapor that expanded with democratic generosity in all directions, and the Duke of Ashbourne, who had been leaning slightly forward to observe, received the majority of it directly onto his perfectly powdered wig. The silence that followed was considerable. Rosalind looked at him. He looked at the notebook. Then he looked up, and his wig was lavender, and she was pressing her fist against her mouth, and his expression was doing something she had not seen it do before. It cracked. Not slowly, not with any management, it simply gave way to something underneath that was actual and helpless and entirely without its usual composition, and the Duke of Ashbourne laughed. Genuinely, breathlessly, with the quality of a man who has not done it in long enough that his whole face changed shape with it. She laughed too. She couldn't help it. It came up through her chest and out of her, and she set down her notebook and laughed at the purple wig and the conservatory and the night-blooming Sirius and the completely improbable set of events that had resulted in both of them being here at 1:30 in the morning. When they stopped gradually, with the particular unevenness of laughter that has been real enough to leave a residue, she was aware that they were closer than they had been, and that his expression, even in the aftermath, had not returned to its usual arrangement. He looked different. Open, she thought. Like a room with the window finally raised. That, he said, was the wrong bottle. The right bottle is on the right. She retrieved the actual compound and applied it correctly, with entirely steady hands. The green bottle on the left is the alkaline accelerant. They're similar in size. I should have labeled them more clearly. Or I should have verified before handing it over. Yes. She looked at the now correct test. Shared responsibility. He reached up and removed the wig, which was a sensible decision. His own hair was dark underneath it, shorter than she had imagined, and without the formal structure of the powdered arrangement he looked younger and considerably more like a person. She turned back to her notebook. "Miss Voss," he said. Why did you refuse, in the library? Not the poppy argument. The real reason." She was quiet for a moment. Because a marriage contract presented without conversation is a transaction presented as a relationship. My father spent his life treating his work as something worth respecting on its own terms. I intend to do the same with myself. She looked up. I'm not opposed to marriage in principle. I'm opposed to being acquired. He looked at her for a long moment. I understand that now. You didn't then. No. He was direct about it, which she respected. I thought efficiency was the same as respect. They aren't. No, she agreed. They're not. She might have said something more, was in fact turning the next sentence over when the conservatory door opened a second time and Lord Vane came in, which was a different kind of surprise and considerably less welcome. Lord Vane was a neighbour, his estate adjoined Ashbourne Park's western boundary, and he had the kind of face that was arranged to be charming and succeeded at the surface level only. He had been at dinner twice since Rosalind arrived, and both times she had caught him watching her with the careful attention of a man collecting information rather than company. He looked at the purple wig in the Duke's hand. He looked at Rosalind with her notebooks and her loose hair and her ink-stained hands. He looked at the conservatory, which at 1:30 in the morning in candlelight was, she conceded, not entirely easy to explain. Ashbourne, he said, with the warm precision of a man who has found what he came for. And Miss Voss. Working late. A botanical emergency, Rosalind said pleasantly. The Sirius. It blooms only once. Indeed. Lord Vane looked at the flower, and then at her, and then at the Duke. Fascinating. I was actually coming to find you. Ashbourne, the East Stable has a situation, but perhaps more pressing, he smiled. I was not aware that the Royal Society's scholars typically worked at this hour. Or without their hair arranged. He looked at Rosalind with the smile still in place and the warmth entirely absent. I wonder if the Dowager is aware of the full nature of your arrangement. The conservatory was very quiet. There is nothing to be aware of, the Duke said, and his voice had returned to its usual composition, flat, cold, the temperature of a winter road. Of course not, Lord Vane said. Though I did find myself wondering, Ashbourne, when I looked into your rather fascinating new scholar, she isn't, is she? Connected to Marlowe. At all. He tilted his head. A parson's daughter from Wiltshire with a botanical patent is a remarkable thing. But it's not quite what you told your mother. He left with the same easy warmth he had arrived with, and the conservatory was the temperature of a different place after he was gone. Rosalind set down her pen. He'll tell the Dowager. Not yet, the Duke said. He'll use it first. His jaw was set. Vane collects advantages. He'll hold this until it's most useful to him. Which means we have time. Some. He looked at her, and the open quality of a few minutes ago had not entirely closed, but it had acquired something else alongside it. I'm sorry. This is a complication I didn't anticipate. Can it be managed? He was quiet for a moment. Then, I have a thought. It requires a masquerade ball and your willingness to be dressed as a goddess. Rosalind considered this. Which goddess? Flora. The goddess of flowers. She looked at the Sirius, which was still opening in its slow, luminous way, indifferent to Lord Vane and the Dowager and all of human complication. That's either very fitting or a sign that you need to think of a better plan. Do you have a better plan? She did not have a better plan. Tell me about the masquerade, she said, and picked up her notebook. Chapter 4. Vauxhall Gardens in November was cold, crowded, and extraordinary. The lanterns were strung through the trees in their thousands, and the music from the central pavilion carried across the paths and the dark walks and the little supper boxes with the quality of something that had been arranged specifically for people who wanted, for one evening, to be someone else entirely. Rosalind had been to Vauxhall twice as a child, both times from the outside looking in. She had never been inside in silk. The costume was Flora, draped white silk, a crown of late autumn flowers, a half-mask in pale gold. Madame Villette had been called in on short notice, with results that Rosalind found slightly alarming when she looked in the mirror, not because they were poor but because they were genuinely good, and she was not entirely used to the person looking back. The Duke was in black, masked, without the powdered wig, which she had not commented on but which she noted. They arrived separately and met at the East Gate, which was the arrangement, and he looked at her for a moment in the lantern light with the expression that had been growing behind his controlled surface since the mud pocket in the garden, since the library, Since the conservatory at 1:30 with the serious opening and the purple vapor and the laugh she had not expected. "You look," he started. "Like a goddess of flowers," she said. "Yes. That was the intention. I was going to say formidable." "That's better," she said, and took his offered arm. Vauxhall was masquerade thick, half of London present in costume, identities technically concealed and practically visible to anyone who paid attention. Lord Vane was here. She had known he would be, the Duke had confirmed it. The plan was presence visible, composed, entirely above suspicion, and if Vane approached, the Duke would handle it before anything could be said publicly. She trusted the plan. She was less certain about the dark walk. It was called that without irony, a section of the gardens where the lantern light didn't quite reach, where the trees closed overhead and the music became distant and the gravel path turned from public to private without formal announcement. People went there for conversations they didn't want witnessed. He steered her there at 10 o'clock, and she went because the supper box had begun to feel enclosed and because she could see Lord Vane across the central path watching them with the careful attention of a man timing something. In the dark walk, with the lantern light reduced to a suggestion and the music a thread, he stopped. "There is something I should tell you," he said. She waited. "The patent," he said. "I don't want it." She looked at him. "You needed it 3 weeks ago." "I needed what it could do," he said. "The drainage methodology, which you have been implementing without the patent being formally transferred, because you are apparently capable of separating your intellectual work from its legal container when the situation requires it." He looked at the trees overhead, then back at her. "I have realized, somewhere between the library and tonight, that the patent is not the thing I am trying to keep." "What are you trying to keep?" she said, and her voice was steadier than she felt, which she was grateful for. He looked at her with the full, direct attention that she had learned was him at his most honest, without the composure as protection, without the control as performance. "You corrected my contract in the margin," he said. 3 separate clauses. "You were right about all of them. You walked my northwest garden in the rain and told me exactly what was wrong within 15 minutes of arriving, and you were right about that too. You have been right about nearly everything, including the poppy, including the alkaline accelerant, including the fact that I proposed marriage for the wrong reasons." "Yes," she said. "You did. I am now considering proposing it for the right ones," he said. "Which are considerably harder to articulate and significantly less efficient." He looked at her. "You told me you weren't opposed to marriage. You were opposed to being acquired." "I did say that." "This is not acquisition," he said. "This is," he searched, and she watched him search, because it was the most honest thing she had seen him do, a man who has been in this garden for 3 weeks and discovered that his estate is considerably less interesting than the person saving it. The music from the pavilion drifted through the trees. "Ashbourne. James," he said. "If you're going to refuse me again, I would prefer you do it using my name." "James," she said, and watched something ease in him, "you have the worst possible timing." "I know. Lord Vane is 40 yards away and has been waiting since we turned into this path." "I know that too. So whatever you are working up to." "I love you," he said. Simply, directly, in the same tone he used when he had understood something precisely and saw no reason to arrange it differently. "That is what I am working up to. I love your annotated margins and your mud-stained boots and your incorrect bottle choices and the way you explained the Sirius at 1:30 in the morning as if it was the most important thing in the room, because you clearly believed it was." He paused. "I am aware this is not the ideal location." "No," she agreed. "And that Lord Vane is approaching." She turned. He was 40 yards had become 20, and his smile was the comfortable smile of a man arriving at a moment he had designed. "Ashbourne," Vane said, reaching them with the unhurried ease of a man who knows he has the advantage. "And the scholar." He looked at Rosalind with the smile fully deployed. "I've been meaning to speak with you both. Miss Voss, or is it, in fact, Miss Voss? Because I've had some difficulty confirming that connection to Marlowe." "There is no connection to Marlowe," Rosalind said. Vane's smile widened. "Well then. She's my equal," the Duke said. The dark walk went quiet. Vane looked at him. "I beg your pardon. Miss Voss is not my scholar. She is not my employee. He said it clearly, for the Dark Walk and whoever else was within range, with the flat certainty of a man reading from a document he has prepared and intends to stand by. She is the holder of the Royal Botanical Patent developed by her father, Dr. Edmund Voss, a man of greater scientific accomplishment than anyone currently employed by the Royal Society. She has spent 3 weeks saving my ancestral estate through her own expertise, which she chose to apply. He looked at Vane with the Winterode expression. Her father was a parson from Wiltshire. My father was a duke. Neither fact is relevant to her capabilities or to my opinion of her. Vane had stopped smiling. I suggest, the Duke said, that you find someone else's private arrangements to speculate about. Vane looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Rosalind, and whatever he saw in her face, because she had not arranged it into anything, had simply let it be what it was, made him incline his head and step back and go, with the particular dignity of a man retreating from a position he no longer controlled. They stood in the dark walk alone. You called me your equal, Rosalind said. You are my equal. He looked at her. That is not a romantic statement. That is simply accurate. It is also, she said, the most romantic thing anyone has said to me. He looked at her for a moment more. Then he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked back toward the lanterns and the music and the remainder of the evening, which was, against all reasonable expectation, entirely all right. Chapter 5. The scandal, when it broke, was comprehensive. It took 4 days. Vane was too proud to say nothing, too cautious to say everything, so what leaked through London's social channels was partial and therefore more interesting than the full truth would have been. The Duke of Ashbourne and a parson's daughter. A fraud perpetrated on the Dowager. A scholar who was not a scholar. A patent. A masquerade. The pieces assembled themselves into a story that was 3 parts truth and 7 parts embellishment, which was the standard ratio for London society news in the winter season. The Dowager Duchess sent 4 letters in 2 days. Rosalind read the first one, gave the remaining 3 to the Duke unopened, and spent the time she would have used on anxiety finishing the botanical documentation she had been working toward since arriving. The documentation was, she knew, the only thing that actually mattered. It was a complete methodological record, the drainage methodology in full, illustrated, with theoretical models and practical applications and the results from Ashbourne Park's northwest quadrant, which was already visibly improved after 3 weeks. It was, objectively, the most significant practical application of her father's work since his original research, and she was proud of it with the clean, uncomplicated pride of something earned rather than given. She presented it to Queen Charlotte on a Thursday. The Queen was a woman of genuine intellectual curiosity who had corresponded with half the botanists in Europe and maintained the gardens at Kew with the focused attention of someone who understood that plants were not decorative but essential. She received Rosalind in a small morning room at St. James's, with 2 ladies-in-waiting and the focused expression of someone who has allocated 45 minutes and intends to use all of them. Rosalind had 45 minutes. She used 38. Queen Charlotte read the methodology with the genuine attention of a person who understands what they're reading, asked 7 questions that confirmed this, and looked up at Rosalind with the expression of a woman who had decided something. Dr. Voss's daughter, she said. Yes, Your Majesty. I read his. Rosalind thanked the Queen with appropriate composure, shook hands with both ladies-in-waiting, walked out of St. James's into the thin December light, stood on the pavement, and permitted herself a moment of what she recognized was joy, clean and specific and entirely her own. Then she went back to Ashbourne Park. The library was where it had started, which seemed right. He was there when she arrived, standing at the window with a letter in his hand that he set down when she came in, turning to face her with the expression that had been on his face, increasingly, since Vauxhall. Open. Present. Without the managed distance. The Queen, she said. I heard. He had, she supposed, contacts she didn't. How was she? Precise, Rosalind said. Intelligent. She read the methodology properly. She set her bag down on the table that still had her father's botanical sketches on it, because she had been working here for 3 weeks and it was practically her table now. She's commissioning a full Kew study. Royal endorsement. He looked at her for a moment. The scandal. Will resolve, she said. According to the Queen, endorsement precedes reputation in these matters. It does, he agreed. She looked at the table. At the peony sketch, still at the top. At the space where the contract had been, 3 weeks ago. He moved. She heard him come around the table and stop, and when she turned he was closer than the library had previously permitted, and he was lowering himself with the slight stiffness of a man not built for it to one knee on the floor of the library, which was not carpeted and was probably cold. In his hand was a flower. Not a ring. A flower, pressed flat, mounted carefully on a small square of card, the petals white and faintly luminous even in the dry preservation of paper. The Sirius. The night-blooming Sirius from the conservatory, pressed at some point between 1:30 in the morning and now, kept carefully. I don't have a contract, he said. I have this. He held up the flower. I have the conservatory at 1:30 in the morning. I have 3 weeks of watching you fix something I couldn't fix, and argue with me about things I was wrong about, and refuse to be smaller than you are. He looked up at her, and his face was doing the thing it had done when he laughed, entirely present, entirely without management. I have the wrong bottle and the purple wig and the mud pocket in the northwest garden, and the feeling that the estate is considerably improved, but I am completely undone, and I would like to know if you will marry me. He paused. This time because I'm asking, he said. Not because I need the patent. The patent can remain yours indefinitely. I am asking about the person. Rosalind looked at the pressed Sirius. She looked at him, on his knee on the cold library floor, holding a flower he had pressed himself at some point in the last week without telling her, which was either the most sentimental thing she had ever witnessed or the most characteristically precise, and was probably both. Get up, she said. Your knee will hurt. Miss Voss. Rosalind. She held out her hand. And yes. He stood, which he did with the slightly uncertain quality of a man who had prepared extensively for the proposal and less extensively for the acceptance, and took her hand, and looked at her with an expression she decided she would like to see regularly for the remainder of her life. One condition, she said. Name it. She looked at his hair, which was his own, dark and slightly disordered and entirely itself. The wig, she said. Never again. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, the real version, the one she had been finding since the conservatory. It was ruined anyway, he said. Permanently purple. Good. She looked at the Sirius in his other hand. That's from the night it opened. Yes. He turned it slightly. I pressed it before it closed. I thought, he paused, choosing precisely, it seemed worth keeping. It was only one night, she said. Yes, he agreed, and looked at her. So is this the first time I've asked you correctly? She took the flower from him, carefully, and looked at it white and paper-thin and faintly extraordinary, the way single nights occasionally were. Through the library window, the northwest gardens were visible in the December morning light, and even from here she could see the difference, the ground level, the water receded, the old elms standing in something that was almost dry. 3 weeks' work, her father's methodology, the Duke's land, restored. She was going to fix Q next. She had ideas already. Come and look at the gardens, she said, still holding the Sirius. I live here, he said. I have looked at the gardens. Come and look at them with me. She moved toward the library door. I want to show you what the Northwest Channel will do by spring. And then I want to tell you what I think we should do with the eastern slope, because the drainage pattern there has a secondary problem you haven't noticed yet. Of course it does, he said, and followed her, and the library, which had been the room where she had refused him, and then agreed to him, and now would be the room where both things had happened and been resolved into something better, received the morning light through its old windows and held it, as old rooms do, without comment. Outside, the gardens were cold and clear and recovering. She showed him the channel. He asked questions that confirmed he had been paying attention. She answered them and then told him about the eastern slope, and he listened in the way she had learned was his most real version, focused, present, actually there rather than managing the appearance of being there. At some point she realized they were walking very close together, and that neither of them had done anything about it, and that the northwest garden under the December sky with the cleared drainage channel running quietly at the edge of the lawn was, unexpectedly, an entirely adequate place to be. The eastern slope, he said. How long? 2 weeks. If the weather is reasonable. The weather is rarely reasonable. Then 3. She looked at the horizon, at the line of bare winter trees against the grey-white sky. It will be done before spring. Everything will be done before spring. He was quiet for a moment beside her. Then, Rosalind. Thank you. For coming back. After I showed you a contract instead of a reason. She looked at him. You showed me a contract, she said. I showed you the northwest quadrant. She turned back to the garden. We were both learning what we had to offer. The winter light did what it could with the bare trees and the recovering lawn and the two people standing at the edge of the cleared drainage channel, which was not much, but was, in its particular grey and gold English way, enough. The Sirius was still in her pocket. She had not put it down. The endorsement from Queen Charlotte appeared in the London Gazette on the 14th of December, and the scandal became, as predicted, the trend of the season. Everyone suddenly very interested in botany, in drainage methodology, in the remarkable Miss Voss, and in the Duke of Ashbourne, who had, apparently, been hiding a capacity for good judgment under 3 decades of composure. The Dowager Duchess required 2 months and a visit to Bath to accept the situation, and accepted it finally because her son was, for the first time in memory, entirely cheerful, which she found suspicious and then decided to be grateful for. The northwest gardens of Ashbourne Park were fully recovered by April. The Kew Commission was published the following year under the name Dr. Rosalind Vane, née Voss, with a dedication to her father. The powdered wig was never seen again. The Sirius, pressed and mounted, hung in the library above the table where she had refused him, and where he had eventually asked the right question, and where everything that mattered had begun.